Okay, well, this is lesson 4 of understanding the Old Testament, Genesis 12 through 50. We're going to start our study of the patriarchs, starting with Abraham. I am Reverend Sherri L. Jackson, located in Alexandria, Louisiana. So what have we been doing so far? When we started, we suggested that there was a grand story that the Bible tells, and it starts in Genesis with a climax of the crucifixion and resurrection, and then bringing us back to God by the time we get to Revelation, that talks about a new heaven and a new earth. So let's just kind of like review. What do we know so far about our story? The first thing we know is that God has created all things, and he created all things very good. But there was one thing that he said was not good, and that was the fact that he made Adam, and all the other creatures of the creation had a mate or companion, but Adam was the only one who didn't, and God said it's not good then that Adam should be alone. Also in our story, we talked about Lucifer, who we call Satan or the devil or the evil one. He has not always been called that. When God created him, he was an anointed cherub, or he was given one of the highest positions in the heavenlies. But he, being jealous and thought that he needed to have a higher position, caused some chaos and was thrown out. So God made Adam, and Adam was made in the image of God. Now, take a look at that word image, and it means to be a reflection of, to be a likeness or a representative. It does not mean that we look exactly like God or we act exactly like God. It suggests that we have some of his qualities. If we had all of God's attributes, then we would be gods. But he made us in the image of himself. We are a likeness. We reflect some of his perfection, but not all of them. We have knowledge, some knowledge. We have some righteousness and holiness, but God gave us dominion over all creation. Over all creation. So when we say we are made in the image of God, it does not necessarily mean that we are exactly like God, but we are a reflection of God. We are a representative of God here on earth. Well, Satan became furious, and he sought to get back at God by destroying God's creation, humans. So God, in his mercy, even after that disobedience in the garden, God still had a plan for humanity. God still had a plan for mankind. So in his mercy, he promises a savior. When we talk about that seed of a woman that's in Genesis, this is the promise that God has given to bring us back to his original plan. We also know in our story that Satan launched a full attack against the seed, and he started with the very first seed, which was Cain and Abel. And Abel was the first, considered the first murderer. And then after that, Satan launched a second attack after he caused Abel to spill blood on the ground. Satan launches a second attack, and this time he's going to attack the entire human race. Wickedness goes off the scale. People are doing what they want to do, but God intervenes to save humanity, and he does that through the family of Noah. He sends a flood because he wanted to preserve Noah, but at the same time, he needed to cleanse the earth. He needed to figuratively, cleanse the earth with the water, and he used Noah's family to do so. What else do we know about this story? We know that after the flood, Satan comes up again. Now, after the flood, you may remember that God says, okay, this time it's water, but never again will I take care of this problem by water. The next time it's going to be something else. It's going to be fire. So after the flood, Satan's still not satisfied. He launches another attack. This time he's a little subtle. He's going to manipulate mankind, manipulate humans by getting them to establish the Tower of Babel. Okay, he gets them to build this tower in such a way that God said, okay, well, if they could do this with having one language, I'm going to some version says confound their language, confuse their language, scatter their language. In other words, they're going to have many languages. Okay, they're going to have many languages. Are there any questions so far? Okay, as you can see on the chart here, we have that Genesis is divided into two big parts. Genesis 1 through 11 is primarily dominated by events. The creation, the fall into sin, the flood, the Tower of Babel. And it focuses on the human race as a whole. The human race as a whole. When we get to Genesis 12 through 50, it's going to be dominated by people. So 1 through 11 is events, 12 through 50 it's people. And it is primarily dominated by the patriarchs. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob are the three patriarchs, and then there's Joseph. These is through Abraham's family, Abraham's seed, that's going to start moving the direction to where God is going to do what he promised through a seed to bring mankind back to its original state. So in this Genesis 12 through 50, it focuses on the family of Abraham. It's going to focus on the family rather than the whole race. And this time it is dominant. It takes place over about 250 years. The other one, it says it took over about 2,000 years. Now remember, even though the stories go one after the other, does not necessarily mean that things took place chronologically as we think they did. Okay? So, when we get to Genesis 11 and 27, Abraham is introduced. As you can see by the chart here, we have Terah, who had 3 sons, Abraham, Nahor, and Haran. And then we also have Haran, who is the father of Lot. When you get to Genesis 11 through 21, you have these words. Now, these are the records of the generation of Terah. Now, throughout Genesis and other parts of the Bible, you're going to see this phrase. Now, these are the records of the generations. And this is a device, a literary device that suggests that the story's characters are getting ready to change. The characters of the stories are getting ready to change. So this is the first time we're going to see, not the first time, but we see that these are the records will indicate to us that we are now moving from Noah's family, and God is going to introduce us to another family. And this family is Abram. The story has changed. The story is shifting. Remember, there's this great grand story, and the next big plot, so to speak, is going to involve Abraham's family. Okay. Now, I have a map here, and if you could see, we know that Abraham came from okay? And if we could see where the pointer is right here, look at some of the places, well-known places that this takes place at. We have Babylonia right here, and right here we have the Persian Gulf. So these are lands that we hear about all the time. Remember the Persian Gulf War. These are lands that we talk about all the time, even today in the 21st century. Well, Abraham began his journey from and moves to Babylon, and he gets all the way down, and right here we have Egypt. Well, the story is going to shift real big by the time when we get to Egypt, when we go through Isaac and Jacob and to Joseph, and we're going to talk about how they ended up in this spot here. But he started over in which is near Babylonia. So whenever you're studying the Bible, always remember to pay attention to the maps and pay attention to the names. If you see people's names, always try to look up their names in your Bible dictionaries or Bible encyclopedias, because names have special meanings. If you can tell get the meaning of a person's name, it will enrich your study, your sermons, your teachings, or whatever else that you are doing, because people didn't name their children just to be naming them. Sometimes they waited a while to determine what this baby's characteristic was going to be. Once they knew the characteristic of this baby, then they would give the baby a name. So this is the map, and his journey starts right around here in which is around Babylonia, and we're going to constantly see these rivers, the Euphrates and the Tigris River. The land and the geography of the Bible is equally important to the story, just as the people are. Because remember, God promised Abraham land, and that's going to be important. So when we get to Genesis 12, 1 through 3, it says, "Now the Lord said to Abram, go forth from your country, from your relatives, and from your father's house to the land which I will show you." Go forth from your country. Go forth from everything that looks familiar to you, I need you to leave everything and go to a place that I'm going to show you. How many times when God tells us something, if you're like me, you have a whole lot of questions. But nowhere, there's no doubt that Abraham, being human, had some questions, but he did what God asked him to do. And so he says, when we get to 12 and 5, and Abram took his wife, Sarah, and his nephew, and they set out for the land of Canaan. Thus they came to the land of Canaan. This is kind of abbreviated version right here, but he says he came from Ur and he went to Canaan. Now Canaan, people talk about the Bible doesn't have anything for black people or people of color, but when we start talking about Canaan and Egypt, all of that, the story started in Edom, which many people believe was around in Africa. So, and the Lord appeared to Abram and said, to your descendants, I will give this land. So he built an altar there to the Lord who had appeared to him. To your descendants, meaning to your seed. Okay? It's all about the seed and the land. The seed and the land. Always keep that in your mind. Seed, land. Because these two things are going to be important to the story. Okay. We get to this verse to the descendants and say, you build an altar there to the Lord who had appeared to him. And he also had with him Lot. He had his nephew Lot and he had his servant Eleazar. Okay, so when God talked about for your descendants, perhaps Abraham, who didn't have any children, thought that Lot would be the heir, or Eleazar would be, but it's not. As God said, it's not going to be these. It's going to be one that comes from your own body. That's going to be your heir. Now that had to be pretty perplexing to Abraham and his wife, who were both at least, when they even got this word to leave, were at least about 75. So they were barren. So naturally, Abraham thinks that it's going to be Lot or even his servant. But God says, no, it's going to be from your own body. So we can look at Abraham's life like this. 4 stages. From Genesis 12 through 14, we talk about God's call and removal to go to Canaan. From 12 through 14, it talks about God's call. Pastor Green, did you want to say something?
Oh, yes. When we stop to think, if you can hear me well, when we stop to think about the call to Abraham, who was 75, and Sarah's wife was 65 at the time, that's a bold statement to say, honey, we're leaving home, we're leaving our property, we're leaving everything that we valued because God called me. Well, there were multiple gods. There were many gods. Which God called you? Who is this God that called you? Where are we going? What are we going to do? There was no highway, no interstate highway. There was no state police. There was nothing but barren land to travel through. and he's carrying servants and cattle and everything. And in that day, it was almost like the Taliban, the strong survive. Whoever can win the battle takes the spoils. And so it took an awesome amount of faith for this man to trust a God that he didn't know. That's worth thinking about.
That's exactly right. At that time, there were many gods, and Abraham did not know anything about the one God. But it said that Abraham is the first person that we've been introduced so far who has the concept of even beginning to think about a single God. This God who has called him, which is, a Pastor Green said, a mouthful, that there were many gods. And so when he goes to tell his family that we have to go, that God said to leave. Well, what God is there? Now we have to understand. Remember, when you were studying the Bible, always remember that the Bible is not the history of the world. The Bible is the history of God's people. Okay, and God's revealing himself, but it's not the history of the whole world. And so the stories now starts to move on God's people through Abraham. Once we get from 12 through 14, 15 and 16 talks about a promise of a direct heir. It is not going to be Lot. It is not going to be his servant Eleazar. It is going to be a direct heir. And so, we make the biblical characters be larger than life. But just think about, they were real people too, so to speak, who had fears, who had doubts, who had pains, who had joys. And the fact that Abraham could think that, well, perhaps when God talks about my seed, well, it's got to be my nephew. It's got to be my servant, because I don't have any, and I'm past that age. So it wasn't that Abraham just accepted this fact, but when God talked about a seed, well, he didn't have children. Then quite naturally he would go to thinking about his nephew. And his nephew is the one that is named and brought with him. Also in Genesis 17 to 21, we start looking at the covenant, which the sign is going to be a circumcision. Remember last week we talked about every covenant had some type of sign. The sign for the covenant of Noah was the rainbow, and through Abraham, the sign is going to be circumcision. Also in 17 through 21, we have the name Abram's name is changed. And Genesis 22 to 25, we have the testing of Abraham to offer Isaac as a sacrifice. So, out of all the people, because there were other people in the land, why would God choose Abraham? What was so special about Abraham? Abraham is held in high respect and admiration. Abraham, all three major religions call him the father of their faith. Islam, Judaism, and Christianity are considered, Abraham is considered a major and prominent person, and they talk about him being the father of faith. All of these three major religions have their roots in Abraham. And as we go through, we're going to talk about just how broad those and deep those roots are. But Abraham conceived the idea of a single almighty God after he didn't know this in the beginning, but after he developed that relationship with God, he understood him to be the single almighty God. Just think about it. He had to draw that conclusion because sure enough, as God has promised, Abram and his wife had a son. He is the prime model of faith. Through Abraham, God reveals his purposes and his goals for mankind. And through his promises, God reveals that he has a plan. So Abraham was chosen because he was held in high respect. And God chose him to usher in his promise. My question today is, I'm just wondering, what can God, when God looks at us, does he think about what he could do with us based on our lives? Can he use us to usher in some great move that he has, some plans that he has?
Let me say this, Sherri, if you can. God knows the end of the story. We don't. So he's well aware of what the final act is going to be when the curtain is drawn. The other side is God is establishing a blood covenant through Abraham, through circumcision, the cutting away, the blood, the foreskin, the circumcision, external. And so God is aware of what he's doing. And as you pointed out, Abram's faith and his relationship is developing as he walked with God. One success story with God that's in our bank of success testimonies and stories can give us another one. So it was like baby steps at first, even though they were joint. Now, Abram, with the concept of one God and building altars and worshiping that one God, we can readily see how his faith is moving closer and closer toward accepting God's will. And it wasn't automatic. It's over time. It's a process. It's growth. It's development. It's trust. It's faith. It's all the things we have to do to become mature in our faith.
Certainly. Thank you so much for that. And one thing that you said that really strikes home is that it was a process. It is a process. Abram was developing as he goes. He didn't have it all right because he didn't know what it was to even know. So he was just going along as God gave him instructions. And even so, he had bumps along the way. He didn't just overnight do everything and accept everything that God had told him. He had bumps along the way. Certainly, even though I know and I believe that God has given me some promises, that there's been bumps along the way because I can't readily see those things. But every time God shows a little bit, and a little bit. And each time I see more, then I'm willing to go a little further. Now, it doesn't always, we like to talk about, we walk by faith and not by sight. Well, that's a process. Michelle, you have any comments? Okay, she's on.
Okay. We were week before last. I guess we kind of touched on this before when your pastor said about you won't have it all right.
Mm-hmm.
you know, start where you are and keep going and you'll get it. So this is really, you know, it's like, you know, this stuff, but then, you know, it's so good to have it reiterated, I guess I'll say.
Mm-hmm.
Um, because I'm in a place right now where I don't feel like I know enough. And so then there are times that I'm quiet because I don't have the full gamut of what it is that I'm trying to explain sometimes, and I don't want it to be anything incorrect. So oftentimes I'll take a seat back, and I'm trying to get past that. So this is really, you know, really just reiterating what you already know, but you have to put it in process.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Sherri, maybe we should remember what you said and how you're walking us through this. Oh, you made it plain to us that Moses wrote these books
Mm-hmm.
after the fact.
After
So
the fact.
Abraham had no Bible. He
Mm-hmm.
had no Sunday school teacher. He had no preacher. Abraham had none of the props that we have. He just trusted God, developed a faith in God, and did what he did. Now, after he did it, now we have the story seeing how strong he was.
Mm-hmm.
And there is a possibility that after someone read our story and see our struggle, they'll be saying, wow, how did they have such faith? Sometimes it's after the crop has been produced that the farmer can really say we had a good year. But in the midst of the drought in the summer, we catch hell sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
But thank God for faithful people like yourself and others who keep going in spite of not having the whole story. And Abraham was like that.
Certainly. Uh, Denise, you want to add something?
Well, I agree with what Michelle was saying. I know oftentimes, like she said, I know a lot of this, and I think sometimes I beat myself up when I feel like I'm not where I feel like I should be. And sometimes I feel like I'm just kind of stuck. And there's so much of life. There's so much busyness and chaos in life sometimes that when you read the story about Abram, I often wonder how he had so much faith.
Mm-hmm.
And he didn't, because as Abram, like you said, he didn't know anything about God the Father. He just knew about all the other gods. So, sometimes it's good to hear that. I know that it's a process, but oftentimes, you kind of beat yourself up when you feel like, you really should be doing more. And it's just good to know that, sometimes you just have to take the bumps as you come. Sometimes, to be honest, I don't even know where I'm supposed to be going or what I'm supposed to be doing other than trusting God for what, he has for me.
Mm-hmm.
But sometimes it's hard to figure those things out.
Yeah, and I think that as since all of us on the line are preachers tonight, especially as preachers, we have when we preach or teach that Abraham or any of the biblical characters was bigger than life, or these perfect, beings who didn't have troubles, pain, bumps, bruises, and all of this, we do a disservice to those who are listening to us. And so just as we think, okay, if we can't do it, I can't do all of this, I don't have no faith, why I can't do this, then just think about what those who are listening to us think. They just like, to hell with this. I'm just going to give this up. I can't do it. It's too hard. But when we put it in terms that, you know, Abraham was learning as he went, that it did not happen overnight. And we fuss at, you know, we give him a bad rap in our preaching and our teaching about, you know, he wanted to get, you know, he listened to Sarah and got Hagar, and, you know, he lied about his wife, you know, being his sister. Well, just think about what the predicament was that Abram found himself in.
Right. Think for a moment now. Here I'm in a strange land where the king, and whenever we're in a kingdom, the king's word is it. Abraham had a pretty wife who was his half sister. They were family. They were not the Western culture marriage. They were arranged marriage for land, for economics, for politics, political strength. And he said, when I go here, Emily's going to see you. And if he desired you, he had a choice. He can kill me and keep you, or I can give him to you, whichever one he wants. And so he chose that, hey, both of us going to live. He going to take you. You're going to be my sister. And hey, I'm sorry, that's the deal. But now he didn't know God was going to bring in ED before there was an ED. And as long as she was in the palace, in the house, God made everything impotent. He didn't know that, but it happened that way. And finally, you know, the king said, Abraham, you lied to us. And he was about to, you know. The other one with Hagar, Sarah was not having a baby. Now we at nearly 90 years old. She's nearly 80, and there was no baby. So her plan was, God said the baby is going to be the seed from your body. That's a key word, your seed. But he didn't say who the incubator was going to be. And so Hagar incubated the seed. But he come back and told him, no, that's not my plan. But you're talking 25 years in that process. A lot go on in 25 years. Well, I was just 50 25 years ago. 75. So when I think about the process of Abraham and what we read one chapter after another chapter, you are so right. This did not happen overnight. It happened through many years, unfolding events, challenging warfare, fighting, surviving, and then when he get to be 100 years old, he finally get this boy. There's no way any of us can say tonight what's going to be going on in our life 25 years from now. Our walk with God is today. We make the best decision for God today based on the best information that we have. Don't wait another 25 years to say, I will make a decision then. Do it now. God is aware of us, and he will forgive us for making mistakes. And he will also, when we work and do something, we give God something to bless. You got to give God something to bless. May God forgive me, but I'd rather apologize sometimes than ask permission. Because Abe had nobody to ask. He just had to do what he had to do. And at the end of the day, he's called a friend of God. Wouldn't it be nice for all of us to be called God's friend based on what we did and not what we thought about? So Sherri, you're right. These are very challenging things in the life of Abraham. But if we don't know the story and keep it in the right context and content, we'll make him superhuman. And that's not who he was. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That's exactly right. We cannot make him superhuman. One of the things that when we are studying, and I'm going to look at, I have some stuff that I'm going to send you. I don't think I sent this, to look at the world of the Old Testament. always remember there was a world going on other than what's going on with Abraham. There are other people in the world who don't know nothing but Abraham, Abraham's God, who will become Abraham's God, and they're doing their own thing. And so there's a world filled with customs, filled with rituals and practices that we have to be cognizant of when we are reading the Bible. We have to look at what's not being said also. Look at what's on the text, but also we have to look underneath the text at the people, the places, the things, the culture, the setting, the audience. All of these come into play when we are talking about the Bible. Okay? And so even when we get to Exodus and we're dealing with those plagues, and the reason why that, you know, the plagues was kind of like a battle of the gods. Pharaoh had his gods, and Moses had God, who we know as Jehovah, Yahweh. But the world was filled with God. So I admonish you and encourage you, if you don't have some type of resources that talk about the customs, the manners, the culture of the Bible, the biblical world, I would encourage you to please do so. Please get that, because it will make your preaching, your teaching, your talking so much richer from doing that. Okay, anything else? Any other questions before we continue on with God's promise to Abraham? Okay, so what did God promise? He says, go from your country, from your relatives, from your father's house, to the land which I will show you, and I will make you a great nation. I will bless you and make your name great, and so shall be a blessing, and I will bless those who bless you, and the one who curses you I will curse, and in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed. So this is a lot going on with this promise, and I can imagine Abraham being overwhelmed. You know, you're talking about anxiety raising, because you don't know, it's just too much. You know, just think about if somebody comes to us with something that doesn't even seem practical. But the first thing he says, go forth from your country. He says, from your country, and then from your relatives and your father's house. Now that's three different sets of people. Your country is like the big picture. You're gonna leave everything that's familiar to you. Okay, you're gonna leave the country. Just think about that, the United States. Then he says your relatives. That's all your, okay, that's Racine. That's Alexandria. That's all the people that you know, that's in your, that's in your circles, your extended family, your cousins, your friends, your aunties, and your uncles. And then he says, not only from the country and the relatives, but from your father's house, from your family of origin, the people who you grew up with, the people who raised you, the people who you played with. How many times has God had to instruct us to leave not only our everything that's familiar to us on the outside, but also on the inside? Our families, we have to pick up and leave. Pastor Green, I saw you flashing.
The other side of that, too, you're right, is leave our native tongue. Those who speak the same language.
Mm-hmm.
go to a foreign country where the language is different. That's why he was called a Hebrew. He was a stranger in a different land. So it's one thing to leave town, another thing to leave family, but to travel abroad where there is a different language is very challenging. And he does not know who this God is that's telling him this. Not like we do. He did not have the information we have. So now we may be able to see how faith in a God that he was not acquainted with, but developing a relationship with, is an awesome thing to do. Think about it. Would I do it?
Wow, what a question. And just, you know, having traveled abroad and gone to, I remember when I went to China, not knowing the language and how alienated I felt because I did not know the language. I just remember going in the store, I had forgotten some lotion. And so I go to the store and we're in Beijing, and I'm thinking, okay, surely the people in the store know that they have tourists, they speak English. Nobody spoke English. So I'm looking, I said, okay, God, I don't know the language. They don't know what I'm saying is what they're telling me. Maybe I can read the picture. So I go and look at the picture. I see the Olive Olay logo, but I don't know if it's lotion or body wash. And so it's simple, but it raised my anxiety level because I could not communicate. I was a foreigner. Now just think if it was something more than me needing lotion, and I was in emergency or something to that effect. I didn't know the language and they didn't know my language. So just think about what Abraham must have been thinking. Now, Abraham was a ruler in his country. Abraham was not a poor guy. His family was not, they were not poor. So God is asking him to not only leave your native tongue, but also leave everything that's there. Leave it there. Don't take anything with you. And then later we're going to see that, you know, he takes his family with him, which is a mistake, because he told him to go forth. But just think about when he went through, he had to travel through other land where there were other pharaohs, there were other kings. And you didn't just pass through another person's territory without dropping off a gift. And I was reading that it would be one thing if it was just Abraham and his wife. He probably could have, just went on through and not caused a commotion. But it was a large amount of them that was traveling that caused a problem, and that caused them to bring attention on themselves. Pastor Green?
Well, your cattle got to eat grass. They have to drink water. Your livestock has to be provided for. His servants had to have food. His army, his personal army that was big enough to conquer and capture other small lands. It was like the Taliban, I tell you. They ride through, and whatever territory they can control is what they have. And so Abram had quite a group. The key thing he left was his land.
He left his land.
He left his land. And what made a man great was his territory, his land. So when God said, I will give you land, I will give you soil, and I will give you seed, and I will be your source. I mean, the soil, the seed, and the source. Those are things you got to have if you're going to become great. So God is moving him from one land where he's known and family and friends to a strange land where he is not known. Therefore, he will have to trust his God to survive. Sometimes We have to be put in a position where there is no one else to trust but God. And when we get in that position, our faith grows. But as long as we can trust something else, we're not totally dependent on God.
Certainly. And so remember, we've said previously, the land is just as much as a character in this story than the people are. Because a person's your land was used for all kinds of things. It was used for political reasons. It determined how people looked at you, what kind of honor you had, what where your rank was in society. So God is telling him, leave your land. Leave everything that's familiar to you. Now that's a feeling, to leave and go somewhere where you don't know know anybody. And but this is what God told Abraham to do. Any questions or comments, Denise, Michelle?
I mean, this is just so intriguing to me, and to just hear, you know, a different perspective on how we should, you know, open up our understanding and go beyond, you know, beyond the box, to think about a lot of these things. And a lot of the things that, you know, I've heard Pastor Green say tonight, and even you, those things had not occurred to me. So it's good to, you know, have that perspective, and it gives me more to consider and to think about, so I can, you know, really assess, you know, what the whole story is. And just to know that even when you say God told him to leave, not to take his family, he told him to leave, and he still took his family with him. So, you know, like you said, there's going to be bumps and bruises along the way, and we're going to make mistakes, but that doesn't mean that God is going to turn his back on us. So that's, you know, that's a good thing.
And remember also that today, we are preaching and teaching to people who we must be able to give them the story in such a way that it does not appear to be out of their reach. You know, just think about how we use that word faith today. If you don't have enough faith, if you got enough faith, you don't get sick. If you don't have enough, the reason why this happened to you is you don't have faith. We've just kind of like made it such a buzzword, and we try to compare ourselves to Abraham. Abraham provides us with some principles by which we can live. But Abraham took the bumps and bruises for us to be able to give us the principles. Because as Pastor Green says, he didn't have no Bible. He didn't have anything but God's voice to him. And then that voice was an unfamiliar one. It was an unfamiliar one. So on this one, God's, Pastor Green.
Okay, say again.
I saw you blinking. I didn't know if you wanted to talk.
Well, my concern is that there are times when we would take part of the story and take it out of context. And we would tell it based on our culture, our experience. But most of us in this Western culture have never lived in the kingdom where the king makes the decisions and the subject implement the plan. And traveling abroad, I've gone through kingdoms. And in this Western culture, we make the Bible politically correct rather than true to the time of Abraham. Abraham was one who developed a relationship with God based on what he experienced with God. And as Moses write about it, then we can use Abraham's life to learn from and use it as a tool to help us develop faith in God without the same experience, if that makes sense to you. We can read his story, look at what he did, and our faith can grow without having to have the same experience and same dysfunctional family. That was very dysfunctional for to put his 14-year-old out of the house that his wife helped him bring in the house because now she has a baby. That must have been heartbreaking for him. But Ishmael was his firstborn child, even though he was firstborn to Hagar. Isaac was his firstborn to Sarah. So here's a man torn between two boys, two women, and trying to do God's will. And then asked to kill the second one. I mean, this is just mind-bothering to think about. Put one out, buy a well, and Ishmael's children incidentally have the oil now, and Isaac's children have the money. So, and they've been fighting ever since. And then we're in a family feud over there in the Middle East with Abraham's children. But just to think about the pain of that father trying to make a choice on which one of his boys to live, and then God come back and sacrifice the other. I mean, it's mind-boggling when we think about how his faith developed. But thank God that we can read his story and not have his experience and learn from it.
Certainly. Thank you so much for that. So when we look at God's covenant to Abraham, we can see it just kind of like all the parts of the covenant and the verses that go along with that. I will make you a great nation. I will make your name great. I will bless those who bless you. I will curse those who curse you. I will, through you, bless all the families of the earth. I will give this land to your descendants. Your descendants shall be as the stars, and to your descendants I'll give this land. And then he repeats those promises again in 17:1 through 11. So there are some blessings, but there are some conditions. You got to, the nation, the blessings are, I will make you a great nation. He says, I will make your name great and I will give you this land. You're going to leave your land, but I'm going to give you this land. Seed is going to be blessed, and you, all the nations of the earth shall be blessed. But the conditions are, you have to leave your country, your family, and your father's home, which is your home. And then, you know, because Abraham did these things, God did what he promised to do.
One small detail was left out, is that there were people living in the land who didn't want to give it up.
Mm-hmm.
When I think about that, I say, wow, people living in it.
The land that he was going to. So when we talk about the Abraham's promise, remember there's some, God did promise something to him, but he was going to have to do something also. So, and then the one of the grand finale of Abraham's story at the end of the day was that, as Pastor Green talked about, his first son Ishmael, and based on the rules and customs of the day, the first son should have been the person who got the inheritance. But this is the first indication. Well, first of all, Ishmael was not supposed to even come along. But even as Abraham got with Hagar and got Ishmael, God still provided for Ishmael. And this is a good example of no matter how the baby comes, the baby should not be held accountable for the parent's action. In other words, we should not punish the child based on what the parents did. So God still provided for Abraham, for Ishmael, for Ishmael. But he still had to go back. Abraham still had to go back to get it right, to be able to bring forth Isaac. And the great test was when God told Abraham to take his son, his only son, and take him up to sacrifice him on the altar. Now, that sounds familiar to me, that it's going to come up again. Where do we hear that kind of language? Take your son, your only son, and sacrifice. And where else have we heard that type of language? Is there another?
You know, God didn't have but one son, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And we're talking the same mountain range in the mountain of Moriah, which is called current modern day Calvary. That's pretty easy for us to think about it. That's what happened to Jesus.
Yes. So this is the first talk of sacrificing a son, and it's
Right.
going to come up again when we talk about Jesus and God sacrificing his only son. So as you think about and you study, always think about where this type of thing comes up again. Is this person or this character a type of somebody else? And you've heard this phrase, a type of Christ. Moses was a type of Christ. In other words, the things that Moses did was a foreshadow of the work that Christ would do. Remember, Exodus is about salvation or bringing out. Moses led the people out. Jesus will lead us out of our sinful state. So you have to be able to tie up people, tie up places, because the Bible is full of repeat. And it's a rhyme and a reason. It's a rhyme and a reason to it. Okay, are there any more questions? Any questions? This is going to end our, any questions about our lesson for tonight? Okay, hearing none, just for a minute while we have